In January of 2024, the Johnson family moved into what they thought was their dream home. Mark and Sarah had worked tirelessly to afford it, a cozy two-story house on the outskirts of a quiet town. Their two children, Lily and James, were just as excited, imagining new adventures in their new home. It seemed perfect. For the first few days, it was. But then, things started to happen. Mark noticed the front door unlocked in the morning, even though he was certain he had locked it before bed. Sarah swore she heard faint footsteps upstairs while she was home alone. Little things they brushed off, quirks of a new house, forgetfulness, or their imaginations playing tricks on them. But their daughter Lily began waking up screaming every night, insisting that someone was watching her from the corner of her room. The first time it happened, they reassured her it was just a bad dream. But the next night, she told them the same thing, describing a woman in black who stood at the foot of her bed, staring. By the morning, scratches appeared on Lily's door. Sarah begged Mark to call someone, anyone, for help. But Mark, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as coincidence. On the second night, the noises grew louder, doors opening and closing on their own, heavy footsteps pacing the hallway. Mark decided to set up cameras around the house, convinced that he would find a rational explanation. Instead, the recordings only added to their fear. Objects moved on their own. Doors opened and closed with no one nearby. And then there were the whispers, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to echo from nowhere. By the third night, the family was no longer sleeping. Mark and Sarah took turns sitting awake in the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. It was on that night that their neighbors reported hearing screams coming from the house. Long, blood-curdling screams that stopped just as suddenly as they began. The next morning, the Johnsons were gone. The house was empty. No one could find them, and no one could explain what had happened. But the police discovered something chilling inside. A journal left open on the dining table with a final entry scrawled in shaking handwriting. "It knows we're here, and it won't let us leave." What happened to the Johnson family in those 3 days? What was lurking inside their home? This is their story. The scariest true event of 2024. This story begins in January 2024, in the quiet town of Maple Hollow. Tucked away from the chaos of the city, it was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. The Johnson family, Mark, Sarah, and their two children, Lily and James, had moved there seeking peace, a fresh start in a home they'd dreamed of for years. It was their first house, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice, but their dream was short-lived. For the first few days, the family settled in comfortably. Boxes were unpacked, new routines were formed, and the children explored every corner of their new home. On the surface, everything seemed normal. But behind the scenes, there were signs, small, almost imperceptible things that hinted at something much darker. The unlocked doors, the strange noises, the uneasy feeling Sarah couldn't quite shake whenever she was alone in the house. She told herself it was just the adjustment to a new place. She didn't want to worry the children, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Mark, ever the rationalist, dismissed her concerns. "It's an old house," he said. "Old houses creak, and we're all just a little on edge from the move." His words were reassuring at first, but reassurance turned to doubt when Lily woke up screaming the next night. When they rushed into her room, they found her sitting up in bed, trembling, pointing to the far corner of the room. "She's there," Lily whispered. "The woman is watching me." It wasn't the first time Sarah had heard Lily talk about this woman, but she assumed it was just her imagination. Kids make up stories, don't they? But Lily's fear was palpable, her voice shaky, her face pale. Mark dismissed it again, but this time Sarah wasn't so sure. And when the scratches appeared on Lily's door the next morning, even Mark couldn't explain it. And then came the knock. It was late at night, far past when anyone should be visiting. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the quiet house. When Mark opened the door, there was no one there. He checked the street, the yard, even the edge of the woods behind the house. Nothing, just silence and darkness. That knock was the beginning. From that moment on, the Johnsons' dream home became something else entirely. What started as small, strange occurrences quickly spiraled into something no one could rationalize, and certainly no one could escape. The Johnson family's new home sat at the edge of a secluded cul-de-sac, bordered by a dense patch of woods that seemed to hum with life even in the stillness of winter. The house itself had a charm that masked its age, a wraparound porch with peeling paint, tall, narrow windows that looked out onto the silent street, and a steeply pitched roof that gave it an almost storybook appearance. To Mark and Sarah, it was perfect. A fresh start, a place where their children could grow up safe and happy. But beneath the surface, the house carried a history the Johnsons didn't know. Built in the late 1800s by a reclusive family named the Ashcrofts, it had passed through a series of owners, many of whom left under strange circumstances. There were whispers in the town about the Ashcrofts. Rumors of dark rituals in the woods behind the house, of strange visitors arriving at odd hours, and of a tragedy that no one liked to discuss, a fire that killed the last remaining members of the family, though some said not all of them perished in the flames. Over the years, the house gained a reputation. Families who moved in often left within months, leaving their belongings behind as if fleeing something they couldn't explain. Realtors stopped showing the house openly, relying instead on desperate buyers looking for a bargain. And that's exactly what the Johnsons had found, a beautiful home at a price too good to be true. Mark and Sarah Johnson were like any other couple in their mid-30s, hardworking, practical, and hopeful for their future. Mark was an engineer, a problem solver by nature, who approached everything in life with logic and reason. Sarah was a stay-at-home mom, deeply intuitive and fiercely protective of her family. Together, they had built a comfortable life, and buying this house was the next step in their journey. Their children, Lily and James, were the heart of their world. Lily, at 8 years old, was quiet and thoughtful, with a love of drawing that often filled her afternoons. Her sketchbooks were filled with whimsical scenes of animals and fairy tale characters. But in the new house, her drawings began to change. James, just 5, was the opposite of his sister. Rambunctious and full of energy, always running from room to room, his laughter echoing through the house. To the Johnsons, moving into this house wasn't just a milestone. It was a promise of better days ahead. For the first few days, life in the new house seemed idyllic. The family spent their time unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and exploring the property. James discovered a swing set in the backyard, overgrown with vines but still sturdy enough to use. Lily found an attic filled with dusty old furniture and forgotten trinkets. To Sarah, the house felt lived in, as if it had been waiting for them to arrive. But soon, she began to notice small things that didn't make sense. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. On their second night in the house, Mark woke up to find the front door wide open. He was certain he had locked it before going to bed, but he chalked it up to a mistake. Perhaps the door hadn't latched properly. Sarah dismissed it too until the same thing happened again 2 nights later. Then came the footsteps. Sarah first heard them while she was in the kitchen unpacking dishes. They were faint but distinct, creaking across the floorboards upstairs. She assumed it was one of the kids, but when she called out, Lily and James appeared from the backyard, their shoes muddy from playing near the woods. She laughed it off, telling herself it must have been the house settling, though the sound lingered in her mind. A week after moving in, the family began to notice objects out of place. Sarah's favorite mug, which she always left on the counter, appeared one morning on the dining room table. A pair of James's sneakers vanished, only to be found days later in the attic. Mark dismissed these as harmless oversights, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was inside their home. The cold spots came next. No matter how high they set the thermostat, certain areas of the house remained icy. Lily's bedroom was the worst. Sarah started to notice her daughter waking up shivering, even though she slept under heavy blankets. When Sarah asked Lily about it, the little girl said simply, "It feels like someone is breathing on me." The real turning point came one night when Lily woke up screaming. Mark and Sarah rushed into her room to find her curled up in the corner, pointing at the far end of the room. "She's there," Lily cried. "The woman is standing right there." Mark turned on the lights, but the room was empty. Sarah tried to comfort her daughter, but Lily was inconsolable. When Sarah asked what the woman looked like, Lily whispered, "She's wearing black. and her face is gone. Things only got worse from there. Mark installed cameras around the house, hoping to catch an intruder or find a rational explanation for what was happening. The footage was unnerving. Doors opened and closed on their own, chairs shifted positions, and late at night, the cameras in Lily's room would capture faint orbs of light floating near her bed. The knocking started the following week. Always 3 knocks, always late at night. The sound seemed to come from the front door. But when Mark opened it, no one was ever there. One night, the knocks came from the walls instead, first in the living room, then in the hallway, then just outside Lily's bedroom. The family began to feel trapped, as though the house was alive, watching them, waiting. By now, Sarah was terrified. She began keeping a journal of everything that happened, convinced they would need to show it to someone, anyone who could help. In one entry, she wrote, "I don't think we're alone here. Mark won't admit it, but he knows it too. The kids are scared, and I don't know how much longer we can stay." But leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. And as the family's fear grew, so did the presence in the house. What had started as faint whispers and harmless movements had become something much more sinister. And the Johnsons were about to discover just how dangerous their new home really was. It was on the 23rd night that the Johnson family's nightmare truly began. Mark had barely slept in days. Every creak, every knock, and every faint sound jolted him awake. But that night, it wasn't a noise that woke him, it was a feeling, a deep sense of unease that settled in his chest like a weight. He opened his eyes to see the faint glow of the alarm clock, 2:47 a.m. The house was silent, too silent. As he sat up, he heard it, a muffled sound, soft at first, but unmistakable. Crying. It was coming from down the hall. Mark glanced at Sarah, who was still asleep, then slipped out of bed and into the dark hallway. The crying grew louder as he approached Lily's room. Pushing the door open, he found her bed empty, the covers thrown to the floor. Panic surged through him. "Lily?" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. No answer. He followed the sound of her crying, which led him to the top of the basement stairs. His heart sank as he saw her small figure standing there, motionless. Her head was tilted slightly to the side and her hair obscured her face. "Lily," Mark said, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" She didn't respond. Slowly, he stepped closer. That's when he heard her whispering. Her voice was low, almost mechanical, repeating the same words over and over. "She wants me to come downstairs. She wants me to come downstairs." Mark froze, his mind racing. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and she turned to look at him. Her eyes were wide and glassy, as if she were in a trance. Without a word, he scooped her up and carried her back to her bed. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. She just stared at him with that same blank expression as he tucked her in. That night, Mark sat in the living room staring at the basement door, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows. The following day, Mark shared what had happened with Sarah. She listened intently, her face pale. "Something's wrong with this house," she said. Mark wanted to reassure her, to dismiss her fears as paranoia, but deep down, he knew she was right. The scratches on Lily's door, the whispers, the cold spots, it was all adding up to something he couldn't explain. And then there was the basement door, always locked, always cold to the touch. Mark decided it was time to investigate. Together, Mark and Sarah ventured into the basement. It was darker than they remembered, the single light bulb casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the temperature dropped with every step. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old boxes, they discovered a small, locked door they hadn't noticed before. It was barely 4 feet tall, made of warped, splintered wood, and secured with a rusted padlock. "What do you think is inside?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Mark shrugged, though his unease was evident. "Probably just old storage," he said, though he didn't believe it himself. He tugged at the lock, but it wouldn't budge. They decided to leave it alone for now, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was behind that door wasn't meant to be found. That night, the house came alive. The knocking started around midnight, 3 slow, deliberate knocks that echoed through the walls. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, growing louder and more insistent. The children screamed as their bedroom doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. Mark and Sarah frantically tried to open the doors, and when they finally did, they found the kids huddled in the corners, their faces pale with terror. On the walls, written in what appeared to be soot or ash, were the words, "Leave now." Sarah begged Mark to leave, to pack up and take the kids far away from the house, but every attempt to prepare for their departure was thwarted. Keys went missing. Suitcases were emptied. Documents they needed for the move were inexplicably torn or burned. It was as if the house itself was holding them hostage. On the fifth night after discovering the locked door, the family reached their breaking point. The knocking had become relentless, accompanied by loud bangs that rattled the windows. The house seemed to groan under the pressure, as if something inside was trying to break free. Mark decided enough was enough. "I'm going to break that door down," he said. Sarah pleaded with him not to, but he was resolute. "Whatever's behind that door, we need to know. We can't live like this." He grabbed a crowbar and made his way to the basement. Sarah stayed upstairs with the kids, holding them close as the sounds of Mark's efforts echoed through the house. The lock finally gave way with a loud snap, and the door creaked open. What Mark saw on the other side made his blood run cold. It wasn't a storage room. It was a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a person to fit through. The walls were lined with what looked like claw marks, and the air reeked of decay. As he shone his flashlight into the darkness, he saw something move, something that shouldn't have been there. A figure, hunched and misshapen, with eyes that glowed faintly in the light. It let out a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Mark stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, and slammed the door shut. But the damage was done. Whatever was in that tunnel was now awake. The rest of the night was chaos. Doors slammed open and shut, objects flew across the room. The whispers turned into screams, voices overlapping in a cacophony of rage and despair. And then came the laughter. High-pitched, childlike, but filled with malice. The family huddled together in the living room, too terrified to move. When the sun finally rose, the house fell silent, but the damage had already been done. Mark didn't sleep that morning. As the rest of the family dozed off in exhaustion, he reviewed the footage from the basement camera. What he saw defied explanation. At precisely 3:33 a.m., the door to the tunnel opened on its own, and the camera captured a shadow emerging. Tall, impossibly thin, and moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. It turned toward the camera, and though it had no face, Mark felt as though it was staring directly at him. By the time Sarah woke up, Mark had made a decision. "We're leaving," he said. "I don't care what it takes. We can't stay here another night." But as they began to pack, they realized something chilling. The basement door was wide open, and the padlock was nowhere to be found. As dawn broke over the small motel, the Johnson family sat silently in their car, their breaths visible in the cold air. No one spoke. The events of the previous night clung to them like a shadow. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He couldn't shake the image of Lily's sketch, of the faceless figure standing in the corner, watching them. "We'll drive until we can't anymore," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Sarah nodded, holding Lily and James close in the back seat. They drove for hours, stopping only for gas. The children remained eerily quiet, their wide eyes darting to the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see something, or someone, following them. Sarah tried to distract them with stories, but her voice cracked with every word. Mark kept glancing at the side mirrors, his paranoia growing with every passing mile. They didn't know where they were going. They only knew they couldn't stop. That evening, they found themselves on a desolate stretch of road, miles from the nearest town. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the car's headlights illuminated an old church perched on a hill. It looked abandoned, its windows shattered, its steeple leaning precariously to one side. "We can stop there," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling, "just for the night." Mark hesitated but eventually pulled into the overgrown parking lot. The family entered the church cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. Dust motes danced in the fading light filtering through the broken windows. The air was cold and still, and the faint smell of decay lingered. "We'll stay together," Mark said firmly, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Sarah nodded, clutching the children tightly. As night fell, The family huddled together in the front pew, the flickering light of a single candle their only comfort. But the stillness didn't last long. Around midnight, the temperature in the church plummeted, and a low hum began to fill the air. It started softly, almost imperceptibly, but grew louder with each passing second. Sarah's grip on the children tightened. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Mark nodded, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the church. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks echoed through the empty hall. They came from the old confessional booth near the altar. Mark stood up, his legs trembling. "Stay here," he said, though his voice betrayed his fear. Sarah tried to stop him, but he was already moving toward the booth. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air around him thick and oppressive. When Mark reached the booth, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the door, his breath visible in the freezing air. Summoning all his courage, he flung the door open. Inside, he found nothing but shadows. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. But as he turned to walk away, he heard a voice, soft, childlike, and chilling. "You can't leave." Mark spun around, but the booth was empty. He backed away, his heart pounding, and rejoined his family. "We need to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But before they could move, the church doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. The candle blew out, plunging them into darkness. In the pitch black, the laughter started. High-pitched, cruel, and echoing from every direction, it filled the church like a sinister symphony. The family clung to one another as the sound grew louder and louder, almost deafening. Then came the whispers, thousands of voices overlapping, unintelligible but filled with malice. Sarah screamed as the pews began to move, sliding across the floor as if pushed by invisible hands. The faint glow of the moon revealed a figure standing at the altar. It was the same faceless entity from Lily's drawings, tall and cloaked in black. It didn't move, but its presence was suffocating. The whispers grew louder, forming a single unified phrase, "You belong to us." Mark grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and held it defensively. "Stay away from my family," he shouted, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. But the figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised an arm and pointed directly at Lily. The little girl began to convulse, her eyes rolling back as she collapsed to the floor. "No," Sarah screamed, cradling her daughter as Mark charged toward the figure. But as Mark approached, the figure vanished, dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. The whisper stopped and the church fell silent once more. Lily gasped for air, her body trembling, but she was alive. "We have to go," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Now." The Johnsons ran from the church, piling into their car and speeding away without looking back. They drove through the night, not stopping until they reached Sarah's sister's house 3 states away. Exhausted and terrified, they collapsed into her arms, begging for sanctuary. Sarah's sister welcomed them without question, but the Johnsons didn't feel safe. Not really. That night, as they tried to sleep, the knocking returned. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks at the front door. When Mark opened it, he found nothing but an empty street. The knocking came again, this time from the back door, then from the windows. The whispers followed, faint but unmistakable. The entity had followed them, and it wasn't letting go. The Johnsons eventually moved overseas, hoping to escape whatever had attached itself to them. But the whispers, the knocking, and the chilling presence never truly left. To this day, the family refuses to speak of what happened in the house, the motel, or the church. They've changed their names, abandoned their belongings, and cut ties with anyone who knew them. But they can't outrun their fear. Was this truly a case of the paranormal? Or was there something darker at play? Something human, buried in the shadows of the house on Willow Lane? The truth remains a mystery. But one thing is certain, the Johnsons' story will haunt anyone who dares to hear it. The house still stands, its windows dark and empty. Some say it's cursed, others claim it's just a house. But if you ever find yourself on Willow Lane, beware of the quiet. Because sometimes, silence hides the loudest secrets. The story of the Johnson family is one that defies explanation. A quiet suburban house turned into a place of unimaginable terror. An entity that didn't just haunt a home, but attached itself to the family, following them no matter how far they ran. To this day, their experience remains shrouded in mystery, raising questions that may never have answers. What do you think really happened? Was the entity truly paranormal, or could there be a more rational, if equally disturbing, explanation? Could the house's dark history have left an imprint so strong it attached itself to anyone who stepped inside? Or was there something even more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Something we're not meant to understand. We want to hear from you. What's your theory? Do you think the Johnsons' ordeal was the result of a curse, a psychological breakdown, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story gave you chills, make sure to hit the like button. It helps us bring more terrifying tales to you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We cover everything from haunted houses and true crime to unsolved mysteries and urban legends. There's always more to discover and more to fear. Finally, if you've had your own experiences with the unexplained, whether it's a haunting, a strange coincidence, or something you can't quite explain, let us know. Your story could be featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are true. This has been the story of the Johnson family and the scariest true event of 2024. Thank you for watching. And remember, when the knocking comes, don't answer.